Hello everyone, I am Coral from Coral Goes Creative. Today I'm going to be talking about Aves Fixit Sculpt and how it compares to Polymer clay. I also want to say thanks to Aves for sending me all of these goodies. So Fixit Sculpt from Aves comes in two parts. It has a part A and a part B. These need to be mixed in equal amounts, and when you're mixing them, make sure you have your gloves on. When you are pulling out your clay pieces, you want to make sure that you use one hand for one of the parts and your other hand for the other of the parts, because if you mix them together, if you stick your hand in part A and then you use the same hand in part B, it can cause the chemical reaction, which can end up making your product hard. So you want to make sure you use one hand for one and one hand for the other so you don't accidentally mess your stuff up. What I like to do is pull the pieces out, and I like to put them into little balls because it's easier to see what size they are and compare them. And I'll pull them out and I'll set them next to each other, roll them up into a little ball, and I'll try and make sure that they're close as possible. I don't think it has to be exactly perfect, so if you do a little bit more of one or the other, it shouldn't be the end of the world. So it doesn't have to be like 100% exact, but you want to be as close as you can just from looking at it. So here I'm comparing the sizes and I realize it's not close enough to the same size at all as the other piece. So I grab a little bit more and I roll it into a ball again. And unfortunately it was too big, so I had to take another little piece off of it, and then it was good enough. So I double checked the balls and they were both the same size, so it was time for the next step, which is mixing the two parts together. The directions say you want to mix it for about 2 minutes. I think it probably does take about that long to mix them together. Sometimes it might need a little bit more if you didn't mix it that well, but I kind of just twist it and fold it over each other, and I'll do it and check on it. Basically, you want to make sure there's no streaks, because if there's streaks, it means it's not mixed together very well. So if I see streaks, I'll squish it back together and roll it for another minute. So it's super important to make sure that it is mixed together and there's no streaks, because if it's not mixed, it means that there's a possibility it won't cure, since it's epoxy. So you want to keep mixing and just make sure. It's better to be safe than sorry. I don't think you can really over mix this stuff because of how it works. This time when I checked it, I did not see any streaks in it, so since it was streak free, it was good to go, so I knew it was mixed. For me, I like to roll it into a little ball and let it sit there for a few minutes. Usually it says 5 minutes on the bottle. Sometimes I leave it there for 30 minutes. The working time for this product is, I think it's 3 to 4 hours. So you have a lot of time to work with it. The longer it sits, the more firm it gets. So for me, when I first mix it, it's a little too squishy for me to work with for like the details and things that I like to do. For some people, they might not have any issues with it, but for me, I like to let it sit and harden up because it makes it easier to work with. So I leave it and let it sit. So there are a few differences between using this and polymer clay, so I figured this would be a good time to talk about it since we're kind of just sitting here. Polymer clay, you can pretty much let it sit out and nothing happens to it. For it to cure, you bake it. You're able to clean it up. You can sand polymer clay, you can do gloss varnishes and things like that. For me, polymer clay is also good for smaller things. I have tried polymer clay for bigger projects, and for myself, I struggle with it a little bit more. It is kind of delicate, and certain things can cause it to break pretty easily or bend if you're working on it overnight. So I enjoy polymer clay for working with smaller things or something that's really detailed. For Aves, I enjoy using it for bigger projects. I've used it for making my original sculpt for my large horn duck that I ended up molding and casting. I dropped that guy on the floor many times because I'm a very clumsy person, and he survived. With polymer clay, if I had dropped him on the floor, he definitely would have broken. His horn probably would have broken, or pieces would have snapped off. So for Aves, I enjoy using it for things that I'm molding and to mold and cast. I also like it because it's easier to work with for bigger projects. I feel like it's a lot more sturdy. It doesn't fold over on itself. Like with polymer clay, I left something overnight, and the next morning I walked out and I think it was like a little horse, its legs had basically bent in half because it just wasn't strong enough. But with the Aves, I was able to position it in certain ways and it didn't collapse in on itself and things like that. So that's why I enjoy using Aves for bigger projects or things that I intend to mold, because they're a lot more sturdy compared to polymer clay. But I also enjoy polymer clay for working with smaller things, so they both have their pros and cons for me. And I'm sure just a few moments ago you saw me touching the stuff with my hands and you're probably like, no, you're supposed to be wearing gloves. After it's mixed, you can wear gloves if you want, but it's also safe for you to touch it since now that it's mixed together. So it's safe for you to touch with your bare hands. For me personally, I like wearing my gloves because it can get stuck in your fingers. It rinses off really easily, so that's not like the concern. I just don't like having stuff stuck on my hands, so I prefer wearing gloves when I'm using it. Also, it's because I'm using safety solvent, and when you're using the safety solvent, you have to have gloves on because I don't want to know what it would do to your skin because of the chemical that it is. So for me, I just wear gloves. I'd rather be safe than sorry. When you're working with Aves, it is similar to working with polymer clay. You can use the same kind of tools, you can use the same kind of techniques when you're working with it, so it's not like it's like, oh my gosh, this is something completely crazy and different. There is just like a little bit of a learning curve just from getting used to using it, but it's not anything that's super crazy. For me, the only thing that I can find difficult about it sometimes is that it can be somewhat sticky, but that can be avoided if you let it sit long enough. For this video, I didn't let it sit anywhere near as long as what I like to let it sit, so it was a little bit sticky than what I like working with. If I had let it sit longer, it would have been fine. This is a safety solvent, and when you're using this, you need to make sure you have your gloves on because this is ultra chemical-y stuff that has a bunch of warnings on it, so definitely have your gloves on. The safety solvent is used to smooth out the surfaces. It allows you to add details easier. For my polymer clay people out there, it's similar to using alcohol or acetone on your clay, whether it's before you bake or after you bake. It just helps get out like little fingerprints and small little lines and things like that. I just use like a drop or two of the safety solvent at a time. A little bit goes a long ways when you use it. Also, if you do too much, it can make it like kind of lose detail if you do too much at once. So I just like to use a little bit. Sometimes I even just put a little bit on my glove or on like my little work surface, whether it's my mat or a clay tile. I'll put a couple drops on there and then I dip my tools in it. That way it can glide along the surface easier than opposed to just kind of just sticking it in there. In regards to using your tools with this, I recommend cleaning them like right afterwards because it rinses off really easily with water. If you let it sit, it will be a lot more difficult to get off. I believe you can soak your tools in the safety solvent. In regards to tools, I use the same exact tools for Aves as I do with my polymer clay. I have not had any issues with it. It might be an issue if you don't clean your tools right away because it can harden and it might be difficult to get off. But if you clean your tools right away when you're done, it rinses off with just water and you don't have to scrub it or anything. But if it hardens, it might be really difficult to get off. I believe you can soak it in the safety solvent, but I haven't had to do that. and you can add your details to Aves just like you do with polymer clay. Use your little tools and you're good to go. I have had a few people reach out to me in regards to Aves and what it's like to work with, how do you use it. So I hope this video has been helpful to you all that have questions, to see how it's used and the processes behind it, and that it's not too scary and different from polymer clay. I definitely recommend trying it out if you are curious about it. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. It was super scary making it because it was my first time ever doing anything like this, especially since I have my Invisalign in and I sound quite different than what I normally do. I've been sitting here listening to my voice getting replayed and I'm like, oh, I sound so much more different, but it's okay. I hope you all enjoyed the video anyway, and thanks for watching.